Okay, how's assignments? Anyone running into any issues? How long are they lasting? What the talk? 30 minutes? Is that about anyone gone significantly shorter than that? Because if you go significantly shorter, it probably means that you're not having enough of a conversation. So I would think 30 minutes would be about that. And are you getting interesting things? Or put it this way, are you getting things you didn't know? And how's the transcribing? Any issues about transcribing? Questions? All right. So it's due Thursday. So when you turn it in on Thursday, what we'll do is that next week then is we'll go through it and we'll print some out and bring some along, and then we'll use those as kind of a as ways of going through and seeing how to do qualitative analysis. Right. So you're doing the survey right now, the qualitative interview right now, and then we'll go through and identify how to do the thematic analysis next week. Good. Yeah. Just that you can just start at the questions. Yeah. So you don't have to do the whole, everything, just like the questions. And, and for questions that you ask, if you're just reading the question, then you just cut and paste the question, right? You don't have to actually, retype everything if you said, as long as you just get the gist about what the question is that you're asking. And then you're identifying, so, you're going to have the name of the person you interview and your name on one page. And then when you do the transcription, then there's nothing to identify the person from then on, correct? Because what we want to do is basically just take the people's names off of it and then give you the transcript. So it means that we don't want you to be able, we don't want to give a transcript where someone can identify who it is that was speaking to. Good. Okay. So schedule. So what we're going to do is, today we're going to talk more about, we're going to start developing the questionnaire today. And then the idea is that we'll then probably go through the qualitative interview on Thursday, on qualitative interview next Tuesday. And then by next Thursday, then we'll have the actual interview ready. And so we'll have you take it and send it out to people to take it. And so then hopefully by the following Tuesday, we'll have the survey results. Because what we'll do is we'll do it in Qualtrics. So we'll have the survey results by the following Tuesday, and then I'll show you how to analyze the results from a survey after that. And that will take us to today's the 7th. So 14th and then the 16th, we'll do that. And then we have Thanksgiving. So on the Tuesday of Thanksgiving, there'll be no class in here. Instead, it'll be movie day. So I just have to find a good movie to do for research methods. I was thinking Oppenheimer, but it's not out yet. It's not on home video yet. Then I thought Barbie. I thought, well, probably not. Probably not a research methods one. But so I'll think about maybe I'll have to think about what's a good research methods movie to kind of show you. So what we'll do is that we'll do it all on Zoom, and so I'll just Zoom it starting at 2 o'clock. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I'll just Zoom until it's done. But if you don't want to call in, if you don't want to Zoom in at 9 o'clock, you can just watch it on your own. Just whatever the movie is, just rent it, watch it on your own. Good. Then we come back after Thanksgiving, and we have a couple classes, and then we have a review session, and then we have the final, and that's it. Oh, try it again. That's it. I know. It's just so sad that we can't just go through December and all of Christmas vacation just doing this as well. But no, that's going to be it. So yeah, so that's the schedule. That week after class, I have to go to a conference that week after class. So either we'll do it by Zoom, or I'll get someone else to come in and give the lectures. Do you have a preference of Zoom versus in class? How many would say me on Zoom versus in class? Okay, so I'm seeing most people on Zoom. Okay, so probably what we'll do then is we'll Zoom in the lectures that week after class. Good. All right. So doing a survey. So what we've talked about so far is we've gone through and did the information sheet, right? Then the consent form. Doing the qualitative surveys right now to kind of inform the questionnaire. And so the next thing then is to do the questionnaire. So the basic design of a questionnaire is that when you go through is that you have an introduction part. And then you have someplace in there, you have to have your dependent variables. Someplace you have independent variables, and then you have demographic variables. And the demographic variables are in there to kind of go through and to make sure that you have, you can talk about the representativeness of your sample. And then you thank you. And then if usually if you're doing some type of payment at that point, you give them a gift card or whatever. So we went through the types of questions. So the various types of questions that you can ask is that you can do closed questions. So like these, where there's basically just, there's just like a place for an answer. You can do checklists, right? Where you sort of say, check all that applies. You can do closed questions of which you have some type of scale like this, right? And you notice how these things are, oops, come back. Notice how these things are arranged is that they have like a question, and then what they do is that they have the responses up here, and then they have going down this way, they have different questions, but all with the same responses. So when you put together a questionnaire, what you want to try to do is you want to try and make it as easy as possible for the person to answer the questionnaire. So the way to do it, so one of the things you do is you think, like if you're going to use a not at all, slightly, moderately, severe scale, is that you try and put all the questions that, or at least all the questions that are related, have the same type of scaling. Because then what people can do is that then they can read this and then just, respond, and they know from the next one, it's the same type of response patterns. Numerical scales like this, advantage of, when you do it as a numerical scale, what you actually end up doing is you treat this as a continuous type of variable, as that. So like if you go from 1 to 7, from not at all useful to useful, then you treat it as like as an ordinal, it has a ranking, like an ordinal ranking. And so like 1 is 2 is is the next value up from 1, and that 3 is the next value up from 2. But you assume that the value that goes, that the distance, the mental distance between 1 and 2 is the same as between 2 and 3, etc. Visual analog scale. They use thermometers a lot of times. The thermometers, like they show, how's your health on this type of scale? And the idea is that then people have some type of relationship to what that, they know what a thermometer is. Ranking. Ranking are sometimes tough to use, because what you're asking to do then is you're sort of saying, you say, okay, rank which of these things, what in this case, amount of pain they would cause, right? So you're looking for what the first rank is. Like, so maybe they say lying in bed is the most painful thing for me. So that they give that a 1, right? And then maybe sitting is 2, and running is 3, and walking is 4. So the idea is that you give someone that they give a ranking like that. But then what you don't know when you have a ranking is what the difference between 1 versus 2 versus 3 versus 4 is. That is that all you know is that there's just an ordinal ranking where 1 is some, but it could be as like on the 1 to 10 scale, lying in bed is a factor of 10, and then sitting is a factor of 3, and then running is a factor of 2, and walking is just a 1 out of 10 scale. So you don't know how to compare them. All you know is that there's just a ranking that goes along there. All right, then closed questions. These are same things that you have a number of different, it's sort of like, this one here, right? Only what you're doing is that you're giving options for every one of them. So a scale like this, where you just have it from 1 to 7, you're not labeling usually everything along there. Instead, what you're saying is just like, okay, this is the worst, this is the best, and so where would you put like within that scale? Whereas this one, what you're trying to do is you're actually trying to give them some type of description all the way through. But you treat it pretty much the same way, as that when you actually go through and that you analyze it, what's typically done is you treat this as a as a 1, and that's a 2, and that's a 3. So you actually end up treating it almost like a Likert scale. A Likert scale means that that you're going to put numbers to it and treat it like a continuous variable. So we've talked about continuous and discrete variables. Have we talked about this? Categorical variables? No, not a shake your head. Okay. There's different, when you have a questionnaire like this, you have different types of variables. So you can have a categorical variable. It's like, what do you like? Do you like chicken, beef, or fish, right? You have 3 different categories. So that people can come through and say, well, this is my favorite, that's my second favorite, this is my third favorite, like that. So that one means that you have options or categories, but you can't. It's not like you're saying is that this is a you're not going to give us a 1, 2, 3 when you actually go through and analyze it, because you don't know what that means. On the other hand, you can have continuous variables, or you can have a discrete variable. A discrete variable is like, are you a student? Yes, no. There's only 2 options. And so usually when you go through and that you code these things into the data, what you do is you get these values of 0 and 1. And then you can have a continuous variable. And a continuous variable is like age, right? Age is a continuous variable. Let's see, we can have your pain rating or sleep quality. And you can have a 1 to 10 scale, let's say, right? Those are continuous variables. And so continuous variables, when you actually do the analysis, what you do is that you're assuming that someone who's a 5 is going to be less than a 10, and someone who's a 1 is going to be someone who's a 1 is going to be less than a 5. So you assume that there's some type of ordinal relationship here going through. Whereas like with a categorical variable, you don't, right? You don't assume that there's an ordinal relationship. You don't know what the difference between 1 versus 2 versus 3 is. You're just saying that they're just different categories. So when you put together a questionnaire, this becomes important because when you want to report things, like when you want to go through and do a test of something like sleep quality, if you think about, we're going to compare people's sleep quality based upon whether they live on campus or not, right? So live on campus, that's going to be a discrete variable. And so what you want is you want to have sleep quality be a continuous variable, because you want to be able to say, well, on a 1 to 10 scale, then people who are on campus versus off campus, they have an average of 5.2 on the 1 to 10 scale, and off campus has a 6.7. So you want to be able to get a number from it so that you can compare the means of those 2 groups, right? If you use the categorical variable, like for this, if instead of sleep quality being a 1 to 10 variable, if you used, poor, good, really good, and try just those 3 different categories, then you want to compare. Well, you don't know how to compare, because you can sort of say what percentage of people do poor versus not poor. You could create a discrete variable to it, but for the most part, you can't necessarily say this is a 1, that's a 2, and that's a 3. So that's why when you put these things together, you've got to think about, when you choose your variables, you usually are going to end up on a survey choosing continuous variables, or these variables that you can actually go through and compare between different groups. All right, then open questions. Open questions are ones that, like we said, you can, good to use open questions, but the problem is going to be is how to categorize them. So like we just did a survey of valley fever, where we gave people some symptoms and we said, what do you think this might be? We gave them symptoms of valley fever basically and said, what do you think this might be? And so people asked, put a lot of different things. Some people said the flu, some people said asthma, we had all these different different responses. So what you have to do with an open one is then go through and try to categorize them, right? And that's where it can get difficult. Because if you have 50 different responses, then the question is, how do you categorize them? So that's why often on surveys like this, you don't end up using that many open-ended questions because it's actually going to be hard later on to go through and to get distinct categories out of them. If you know what your categories are going into it, then just ask them that, right? Don't bother asking an open-ended question. Just say, if you've got some preconceived notions about what your categories should be, then just ask them for the categories. Okay, so how do you develop questions? So there are two basic approaches, right? So one is that you use an established questionnaire, like the Pittsburgh Pain Scale, right? That's an established questionnaire. And the other way is you make up your own questions. So we'll go through kind of the advantages and disadvantages of these things. So the advantage of an established questionnaire is that it's usually seen as being reliable and valid. You'll hit this if you go through and that you do a graduate degree, right? And you have to start doing research, and especially if you start doing research with doctors, is that or people who do a lot of clinical trials work, is that they'll often ask, well, is this question that you have validated, or is it reliable? And what they mean then is that has it basically been published in a way that where it's been shown what the reliability and validity is. So the good news is that I'm not going to go through and show you how to do the reliability and validity of questionnaires, in part because I don't really know how to do the reliability and validity of questionnaires. But if you study psychology and psychometrics, psychology does a lot of going through and checking for the reliability and the validity of questionnaires. So what I want you to get out of this is what we mean by reliable and what we mean by valid. Okay, so reliability refers to the consistency of scores, right, when they are obtained. So the idea behind reliability is that when you measure something twice, it's going to be measuring you're going to get the same type of responses from someone. So, something that's unreliable is if you measure it one time and it's going to be different than if you measure it a second time for the same individual. Valid means that whatever it is that you're measuring is actually what you think that's measuring. So if you have a questionnaire on sleep quality, then reliable means is that if you give it to the person twice, is that they're going to be able to give you a similar type of answer, as they'll answer the question the same way. And valid means that it's actually measuring sleep quality and not measuring something else. Quick caveat, and so we're going to talk about reliability and validity. It gets more complicated when you start talking about measures that have multiple constructs. So sometimes there are measures they put together where they're trying to measure a number of different things in the questionnaire. So don't worry about that, but just be aware that if you run across measures where they have when they say that they're doing all these different types of things that they're measuring, like for example, the SF-36. Do you remember me showing you the SF-36? I'll show you the SF-36. Let's see. SF-36, right? So here's the SF-36. So if you go through it, you notice, so this questionnaire, right? General health, excellent to poor scale. So the way that this is actually coded is it's coded that excellent gets a 5 and poor gets a 1. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is actually when you report this, you can either report this as a categorical variable. So you can either report the percentage of people who say excellent or very good, or what you do is you just report the average number, their average score off this from a group. This one, also same thing, categorical variable, but when you go through and score it, you actually give this a score of 1 to 5. These things, categorical variables, right? Going down. Then, so now you have the categories that are physical health problems. So, right, discrete variable, emotional health problems, energy and emotion, etc. So this is a questionnaire that has multiple different types of subunits. So when they talk about reliability and validity of an SF-36 like this, because it has all these different type of subunits in it, it means that you've got to worry about what each of those different things, kind of whether each of these different things are reliable and valid. Right. So errors occur then when you're coming up with a questionnaire. Errors occur when there's something that makes it so that you're not going to get the same type of responses across time. So there are lots of things that can occur that just that make it so that if I measure sleep quality today and measure sleep quality next week, I'm not going to get the same answers from someone, right? And what kind of things are going to interrupt it? Well, maybe one night there was a marching band outside their window, and the next night, the next time there wasn't. Or maybe one time they were sick and the next time they weren't. Or all these different factors can come through and means that you can get different scores off that. So if you think about, well, how do you get around that? If you want to get the reliability of this measure, then is that, well, what you could do is you could go through and say, okay, I'm going to give it to you right now. And then as soon as you're done, I'll give it to you again. And then see if you get the same score. That'd be a good way to do it. So if you want to check the reliability of the sleep quality, if I give you a sleep quality score right now, and then as soon as you're done, say, oh, you want to take this again? Then you take it. Are the scores likely to be the same? Yeah, scores are likely to be the same because the person just took it. And so they can remember what they put down. So they're unlikely to say, well, last time I put a 4 out of 10. Now I think I'm going to put an 8 out of 10. So can't do that. Can you wait 2 hours and ask again? Well, maybe if they're starting to forget what it is that they put down. So one of the problems with trying to get reliability for some type of measure like that has a short time horizon is that people remember what they do. So there are ways around this, right? But that's the trade-off with reliability. If you're going to try and get the same person to do it twice, is that the trade-off is if you do it too close together, too close in time together, you're likely to minimize all the other things that can cause, their responses to be different. But if you wait too much amount of time, then too many things can change. And so you're not sure whether or not what you're measuring is actually the same thing because they were under different conditions the second time that they had sleep. So that's why the errors that when you think about errors, is that the errors are going to be, you're trying to minimize the amount of these errors that occur, but you've got this trade-off to make. So they usually talk about 3 different types of errors, right? So construction errors means that there's something that it's basically just a badly designed question. And so people read it one way one time, or one group of people read it one way, another group of people read it another way. So that's a badly constructed question. You can have it badly administered. So like I give it to you one time in the morning, I give it to this group, when they just got out of a bar. So bad administration. Or you can do it scoring and interpretation. I mean, that if you've got a questionnaire, especially for something like the Bartell index. Bartell index was this one, where essentially someone comes in and they try and assess someone's independence, level of independence. And so they give them, I think I gave you the example of one thing they do is if they sit down with an older person, they'll say, oh, could you get me a cup of tea? and then they watch the person go over and get a cup of tea, and then they rate all these different things, right? You know, how they are walking and such like that. So what they're trying to do then is the researcher is making the assessment of it. Well, if the researcher is assessing the person at a different time, that's a problem. But also if the researcher just interprets things differently, then you can have a screw up in terms of your reliability. So there are 5 main ways that you can do reliability checks. So the first one is the test retest, right? That's where you give it to someone twice. Now, oftentimes, if you take a survey, especially, in fact, maybe we'll do this. When you go through and you construct a survey, what a lot of people do is they'll put a question in at the front, and then they'll put a question in like toward the end. And what they're looking for is that, did the person answer the question the same way? And so they're doing that not so much because of reliability, but they're doing that because what they want to see is the person paying attention, right? Because if you're just answering the questionnaires and you're just flipping wildly, like, just picking responses going down, then, what the idea is that you're not going to answer the same way. But if you're giving thought to each question, then it should be is that, if you answer a question a certain way at the front, you should answer it at the same way at the back. So they use these types of a lot of times in surveys, they put different types of questions in there, not so much because of reliability, but just to see if they pay attention, if people are paying attention. But it's also a test for reliability. And as I mentioned, the problem with it is that with test reliability is that, it's tough to figure out the optimal amount of time that because you don't want people to have practice effects or to have it, where they just took it and so they remember. But at the same time, the longer you wait, the more things that can change between. There's alternative and parallel forms reliability. That's where you try to get 2 different kind of measures of the same thing. And then what you're trying to do is you're going to compare between the different measures. So again, this is oftentimes done in surveys when you'll get, like, for a pain scale or for a sleep scale, you might put in 2 or 3 different type of sleep scales. And the reason you do it is partly because, you're going to try and see different sleep scales pick up different things. So if you remember the Groninger sleep scale that was on the midterm, the Groninger sleep scale all said, what was your sleep like the previous night? Where the Pittsburgh sleep scale says, on average over the past, week, past 10 days, whatever it was, past month, what's your sleep been like? So in theory, both those things should be kind of getting the same type of underlying constructs about sleep quality, but they're being asked in different ways. And so one thing that you can do is you can put in different types of measures about the same thing in order to see whether or not, if they're picking up different things. But the same type of logic goes along if you're trying to see whether something's reliable, is that you can find different ways of doing it. For example, you could have like a picture, right, of something of like pictures of sleep quality and say which one is more likely for you. And then you can have a scale for sleep quality. And what you're hoping is that, the picture measure and the sleep quality little rating of 1 to 10 kind of line up, is that then you're going to say, oh yeah, see, they're related. The problem is that it's really hard to do in practice to test reliability that way, because you don't know whether or not your picture is any good or not. And so you don't know whether or not if you get a picture and you get a scale and you get different scores, whether it means your scale, your scale is not reliable, or it means your picture is not reliable. You don't know. So that's why it's not commonly done. So that's the problem with this. They have split half reliability. What they do is they separate out the questionnaire into 2 different halves, and they'll give like 1 half to one half at one time, 1 half to another time, or 1 half to one group of subjects and 1 half to another group of subjects. Problem with that is that again, because you only have half the responses coming through, is that it's hard to measure. It's hard to know if you can compare between the 2 groups, whether or not it's truly reliable. Then there's internal consistency, which is inter-item consistency. So internal consistency means that are the measures that you're using, are they being answered in a similar type of fashion, right? Where inter-item consistency means are the way that they're being measured consistent. And then there's validity. So remember, reliability means, is it a measure that people are going to answer the same way at different times, different points of time, so that if you measure someone at one point of time, are you picking up the same thing when they answer the second point of time? That's what reliability means. Validity means, are you going through and actually, is your questionnaire actually measuring what you want it to measure? So if you think about the, go to sleep scale, right, where it's asking about measurement over, sleep over one day versus the Pittsburgh sleep scale, which says that sleep over, the last week, is that what you really want is you want overall sleep quality. That's what you want. And so if what you care about is in general, what the sleep quality is for that individual, then is it better, if you only measure it over a day, are you really getting kind of that general type of sleep quality? So, validity is more of an issue if you start to use things where you think that they're measuring, I don't know, political views. Like if you want to get something that measures political views, then it becomes really tough to know if you've got the true type of measures, true type of items there, because political views are much more complicated. So the reason why you sort of do this, right, is that you're going to go through and that, when you choose a measure, then is that you're trying to choose a measure that's already been tested, because that in the test, then they test it for reliability and validity. That's the idea. So I'll let you go through and read all the different ones. But then the other way to do it is to go through and to write your own questions. So, because there's nothing, if you think about these measures that we're looking at, there's nothing special about them. We can write these types of questions too. And so, well, what's wrong with that? Well, suppose you write a question. Let's say if I want to measure sleep quality, and so I ask about shoe size. And I think, I'm going to measure sleep quality by the size of your shoes. And so I ask people about the size of their shoes. And I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to be predicting academic performance. Okay, so I want to predict academic performance based on sleep quality. And so my measure of sleep quality is the size of your shoe. So not a good measure, right? Is it going to be non-reliable or not valid? Not valid, right? Because it's not measuring what I wanted to measure. So if I went through and if I went through and compared people who sleep well versus don't sleep well, and I just looked at the size of their shoes, is the size of their shoes going to predict who sleeps well and who doesn't sleep well? Probably not, right? Unlikely that size of shoes predicts whether or not you sleep well or don't sleep well. So in that case, then, if you write a bad question, that is, if you write a question that's not valid, then what it typically means is that you're just not going to find any effects from it. So in a way, there's nothing kind of wrong with writing a question that's not, writing your own questions, but you just have to realize is that you might be writing the question in a way that's not going to get, not going to get at the answer, at the construct that you're trying to get at. And so then you're going to show no results. So when you come through and that you do a study and you find no results there, right, no differences between groups, and you've made up your own question, then the criticism that you can be hit with is they can say, well, maybe you just wrote bad questions, or they would say, maybe you didn't use a reliable and validated measure. So that's why people oftentimes go and they try to first use reliable and validated measures, because it's got some type of assurance that it's going to be, there's something to back it up that that it's there. So you've gone through your articles, right? And the articles then have gone, that you went through, is that you found dependent and independent measures. So a good source of finding questions then is to look at these previous papers, because when you cite, when you go through and you get this question from, when you're going to put together your question, if you've got a previous paper that's used it, that they found results, that then you can say, oh, I got this question from a previous paper. So that if the reviewer comes back later on, and by reviewer, I mean, it could be a journal, it could also just be your advisor, right? If you go through and that you submit put together a study, and your advisor sits there and says, well, wait a minute, where did this question come from? And if you say, well, I made it up, right? Is that your advisor is likely to go through and say, go find something that someone else has used before. And if there is nothing like that, then you can make it up. But, the idea is to go through and to first look to see if you can find something that other people have used. Then, once you find something that other people have used, and that, or if you make it up, then so you develop your questionnaire, then the next step is actually, as part of your qualitative interviews, is that after you go through and talk to the individual about it, is that you usually have a sample of your draft interview, and you give them the interview with all the questions that you want. And then you go through the questions and you say to the person, so look at this question here, answer, this sleep scale. And so does that seem like it's a valid, and a question? Do you understand what it's asking? Things like that. So you use the qualitative interviews also as a way of double checking on your questions to see if they're understood. This is especially important if you're doing research with them. Like when we did the farm worker study, right? So we went through this process of getting all these questions, and all these different researchers put in their different type of questions. And so we had this long questionnaire. It's all set up. And then what we did is that we got together a group of community groups that work with farm workers. And so then we went through question by question. And a lot of questions they said, nope, can't write that one. This one's badly worded or whatever. And so they changed the wording of these questionnaires, these validated questionnaires, because they said this won't be appropriate to ask this in this way, or people won't understand what it's going to be. So is that bad that they changed the wording of things? Sometimes, right? Sometimes it is, because sometimes if you have a validated questionnaire, it's validated on that wording, and you don't know whether or not, when you change the wording on something, whether they're going to be changing the meaning of it, right? Whether it will no longer have validity. On the flip side, if you go through and that you don't do it, then they're telling you that there's no that this is not going to be a reliable question, because people are not going to answer it the way that it's not going to get at the construct that you think it's going to get at. So it won't be reliable and valid. Okay. So these are the questions that you have come through and have identified from from the previous weeks, when we've gone through and identified questions. I just sort of took the constructs. So time to put together a questionnaire. All right. So sleep quality. How do you want to measure sleep quality? Hours of sleep per night. And what night?
What night?
Yeah, what night? Well, I mean, so is there a measure that we can use for this?
Past month,
Say it again.
past month, past week.
Yep. And so,
or what-
and yeah. And so was there a validated and reliable measure we can use? I'll give you a hint. I just mentioned two of them about 7 times today. The Groninger, it's not how you spell it. Groninger sleep survey or index. And then the Pittsburgh sleep index. I mean, they're longer questionnaires, right? But you know that they're validated. Did anyone run across when you're going through the articles, did you run across anything else? I mean, you can also ask what you're saying, just so you can say, how is your sleep last night? On this, what scale of 1 to,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Oh.
because you were brave enough to sort of say something. So let's see. So we'll, okay, I won't ask you specifically. Anyone, if you're going to measure sleep, first we'll do quality. So we have the two measures, right? The Groninger sleep scale and the other one, quality. Now, how about if we just ask them what?
4, fair, good, excellent.
Okay. So you want to use a, well, so 4, fair, good, excellent. Probably best to use a 5-point scale. Because oftentimes, this is a big debate, but if you use a 4-point scale, then the problem is there's no middle point. And so if you use a 5-point scale, then there's a middle point. And what people tend to do is they tend to think about, well, on average, how was my sleep last night? And so if they think average, they go to the middle point. So typically is that unless you really want to force people into saying it was poor or it was good, if you really want to, unless you want to do that, is that typically use a 5-point scale or a 7-point scale because there's a midpoint. Or a 10-point scale, right? Something like that. I mean, because a 10-point scale has what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 5 de facto becomes the midpoint because people think, oh, it's 5. So what do you think? So how was your sleep last night? Okay. How was your sleep last night? And then a 5-point scale, 7-point scale, which one? 5, okay, 5-point scale. And then you want to ask about how was your sleep over some other period? So would you word it? And that's not how would your sleep, right? Because how would you word it in terms of how, like if you want to know quality of sleep, how would you word it? I mean, if I said, how was your sleep quality last night? Would you know how to answer that? And you might, but I mean, would that make, like, what's a bad sleep quality? Making it middle night. So you could ask, did you wake up a lot last night? Would that be bad sleep quality? Okay, so you could ask, how was your sleep last night? How was your sleep quality last night? Sleep quality last night. And then you could ask, oops, come back. How often did you wake up last night? And it can go from not at all to lots of times, very frequently, something like that. Okay, so we need to get some type of categories for this. Frequently. Anything else you want to ask for sleep quality? Yeah. Okay, so you say, how well rested did you feel this morning? When did you feel when you woke up? And it could be not at all to very well rested, a 5-point scale. Okay, 5-point or 65-point scale. 5-point scale. And you want to also then ask, how well rested did they feel throughout the day? Because I don't know, sometimes when you wake up, you might feel a bit groggy, but then you're fine the rest of the day. Other times you wake up, and as the day goes on, you get. And do you want to ask about today, or do you want to ask about yesterday? Because if they ask today, then they're still in the middle of it. And so then the time they answer the survey may impact it. But if you ask about, like if I asked you, what was your sleep like? Not last night, but the night before. Do you remember? Okay, so you have to ask about last night. So then we sort of say, how were you when you woke up? And how well rested did you feel through the day?
we ask, before they go to sleep, like how tired do they feel before the bed? Doesn't have to be a factor for them to.
So this is be like, would that be sleep? What would that be? It'd be what, predictors of sleep quality?
For, like if you're very tired.
Yeah.
You go to sleep and then you wake up around the other.
Uh-huh.
I think it's like, yeah, you can do that.
Mhm. Well, I mean, because it's, you know, it's a good idea. It's asking in this case about what predicts someone's sleep habits. Right, because so there's two ways you can do this, right? You could just ask about what their sleep quality is, and you don't know why it is that their sleep quality was good or bad. Could be is because, you know, they were drinking coffee until 10 o'clock at night. It could be is that they were in a marching band outside their, you don't know anything like that. But in a way that all you care about is just what their sleep quality was. Or you could, you know, or you could ask about things that predict their sleep quality. So things that predict sleep quality would be how tired they felt at night. Did anyone run across anything in their paper about predicting sleep quality? No? No papers about, no discussion about what predicts sleep quality? Well, let's make it up then. Someone has a computer. Go on Google, you know, go on Google and type in survey questionnaire predicting sleep quality and see if one comes up. Let's see. I'll do it too. Survey questionnaire. Predicting sleep quality. There we go. Predicting sleep quality from stress and prior sleep, a study. Validation of the sleep quality questionnaire. Predicting models for sleep quality among college students. That looks relevant. So let's see what they use. They use the Pittsburgh Sleep Index and a sleep quality questionnaire. So if we come down here and look and see what they did. So there you go. That looks like that looks like what they're using. So do you want to include those things? Right, because they have sleep efficiency, sleep disturbance, use of sleep medication, daytime dysfunction. So the downside of using it is that you're going to end up with a really long questionnaire. So that's why you got to kind of be. So how many think this is central to what? Let's conclude this because it's really important versus no, let's not include it. So give me your hands first for let's include it. Raise your hand. So we're talking about predictors of sleep quality. Raise your hand if you think yes, we should put up in questions for predictors of sleep quality. Raise your hand. Okay. Well, raise them high. Okay. Raise your hand if you don't think we should put it in. You're the one who suggested it.
It was just, I just.
No, too late. Too late. The crowd's spoken, is that they want it in there. Okay. And so since you came up with it, let's have a vote. How many would vote that he has to find the questionnaires for the predictor of sleep quality? Congratulations. Congratulations. So find the questionnaires for predictors of sleep quality. Anyone else want to suggest something? Yeah. Uh-huh. I don't know. He's going to find out.
They're guaranteed.
And you know what? We really don't want excuses. We just want a validated and reliable measure for sleep, for predictions of sleep quality. Mhm. Anyone else want to suggest anything? Suddenly the number of responses goes way down. Okay, so we have a quality of sleep. You're going to get predictors of quality of sleep. Okay, so now we need amount of sleep. So in your question, in your cert papers, there must have been questions about the amount of sleep. How'd they ask it? Did they just ask how many hours of sleep did you get last night? Is that the way they asked it? Or did they do, what time did you go to bed? What time did you wake up? Did you wake up in the middle of the night? Yeah. But part of, I mean, because like taking your point, you could go to bed at 10 o'clock and lay there for 3 hours and then finally fall asleep and wake up at 2 and lay there. And then, so, you know, you could sort of do the bedtime thing, but then you could also say, yeah. Yeah. Right. Good way to do it. We can't do that. We're just doing a one-time survey. But it is that would be the more, but I mean, so what they have them do, they have them say what time you went to bed and then how many hours did you lay there? I mean, would they, like what time did they went to sleep? Okay, so how do you want to ask this for, like if I asked you for, if I said in the past week, what time did you go to bed? Could you answer it? Do you go to bed usually at the same time? Hmm. Anyone here not go to bed at the same time on like on weekends? No, really? All go to bed? Yeah. So you're on weekends, you go to bed earlier because you want to be rested up for the week. Is that right? So you could do it how often? I mean, what time do you normally go to bed during the week? So I mean, because now you're asking about average time going to bed, not the total time. I mean, not the that. Could you answer that? Okay. You could ask. You could ask, what time do you usually go to bed? What time do you usually wake up? Then, what time would you what time would you like to wake up? If you're given your on the what time would you like to wake up? Yes, please suggest something.
You could ask, did we implement the time to sleep and how rested you feel throughout the day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because we'll have the how rested they feel through the day, right? From this thing, right? We have how rested we feel through the day. So we need to get a sense about kind of just overall, like their overall kind of amount of sleep they get. You're trying to just withdraw it because you're afraid I'm going to ask you to go find that one too. No. Well, I mean, so you could, because we have to get sleep, but then you also have to ask about like how much sleep they need. So how about if we ask it that way? Well, if we said how many hours of sleep do you think you need? And then how often do you get that amount of sleep? How about that? And then ask them how much they sleep on average last week during the week. Could you answer it? If I asked you on average, how much sleep should you get? Would you think you should get? And if I said on average, last week, did you get that amount of sleep? But you could say on average from last Monday through Friday, how many nights did you get that amount of sleep? That amount of sleep or more. Could ask it that way. Could you answer it? If I asked you for last week, how much sleep did you get last week? So how should we ask this? I mean, what matters? Does it really matter how much sleep they get, or does it just matter how much sleep they think that, how much they feel they get? Like if you ask me, if you said, did I get enough sleep last night? I'd say no, right? So I had to go to a dinner and then I laid there awake for a while. And then I get up early this morning. So, but if you ask me how many hours did I actually sleep, I'd have to figure out the numbers, but I could tell you much more reliably, like, whether or not I actually got enough sleep. All right, we're going to put a question mark there. Think about that one. Okay, let's see. We have distance to school. So distance people, this is from you. Raise your hand if you're a distance person. Hands barely go up, just like peeking out. So distance people, how would you ask this question? These questions. Okay, how far, how far? How many minutes does it? So like on average, how many minutes does it take to get to campus? Campus. Okay. And what? You want to know variability of it? I mean, that's one thing that came up, right? Is that sometimes it takes you, on average, it might take you 20 minutes. Sometimes it might take you 30 minutes. Sometimes it might take you 5 minutes. Other people, it's always going to be 15 minutes. Okay. Do you want to do it that way, or do you want to do it like if you left at, would it, because are you thinking is that maybe at different times of the day, okay. What time do you usually leave for campus? And then say it loud. Do you think it better? I mean, so your think is like, okay, so you want to know, so you're thinking about like trying to identify the people who are the early, have to go there early. Okay. So, and because what you think is that it's the distance might lead to, because we had that whole thing about distance and leading to a different type of like, would you go to class or not go to class, right? So I think for distance, then this captures distance, and then this one captures usual time. Okay, so just leave it there. Well, let's say I think that's later on. So I think, yeah, here's importance of attending class, those kind of things. So I think we can get that. So hang on to that. Academic performance. How do you want to measure academic? This is a more general question for everyone. How do you want to measure academic performance? Remember, you can measure it different ways, right? So academic performance. So, okay, so this semester's exam scores. Okay. So you want to say list your classes and what grade did you get on your midterms for each class? Yeah. Would you know if I asked you what grade you're getting in this class? Would you be able to answer it? No. Well, you probably, what would I tell you? Look at your midterm, right? That's probably the first indication of what it is. Right? Because midterm's the best indication. So maybe, so that's why, because it's hard at this point to figure out what all the assignments. Okay, so we can do expected grade in class. What grade do you expect to get in the class? Would that be? Yeah. Yep, so you could do, so for GPA, GPA, right? So what's your current GPA, right? So that gives the previous academic performance. But then you want to know how it affects academic performance this semester. So could do, what grade do you think you get in the class? Should say what grade, list your classes. Here's all your classes this semester. And then what grade do you think you have right now? Like that? Okay. Anything else you want for academic performance? Yeah. Or you could just sort of say, what grade you think you'll get at the end of the semester. Would that be? So for each of the classes, you could say, what grade do you think you will get? What do you think your final grade will be in each class? Like that. And then just give them the D or lower through A+ and let them go through and click. Okay. So give them a scale. Yeah, that's good. Scale from D to A+. Good. Anything else on academic performance? Okay, next time we'll deal with these two. So go back and look at your paper that you turned in for your assignment and see how they did all these different things, okay? Because it will make your life and our life much easier if we can go through, if we can find where they've actually used these types of measures before, so we can use them. Good. All right.